a very exciting session planned for you. So, 10 powerful lessons from coaching great leaders from across the globe with Ruchira Chaudhary, who's a leading executive coach and soon to be author. Her book is going to be published by Penguin very, very soon. We're very excited about that. This learning session is brought to you by Sipping Thoughts and BW Business World. Anurag is also with us. He needs no introduction, but I will introduce him a little later. I am Sukirti Gupta. I'm the co-founder of Sipping Thoughts. Sipping Thoughts is a multi-platform media company that was co-founded by me and Meeta Gudgutia. It was set up keeping in mind the tagline, Real Women, Real Thoughts. We are a space for women to be heard and to share their thoughts without judgment. We want to create a network of women for women and, of course, for the men that support us. Sipping Thoughts is available on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook, and, of course, please do check out our website and about BW Business World. It's a fortnightly magazine. Now, I would say it's more bigger in its digital presence that was launched 3 decades ago. It's one of the most respected business magazine. Business World team prides itself on spotting key trends in the economy and business, and it has done this consistently for decades, whether it was spotting the rise in the IT sector in the 90s, the pharma and telecom trends in the 90s, or social media, healthcare, and e-tailing revolution in the recent times. They've also been following Corona in a big, big way in terms of what can we do as business people. So if there is a trend out there, Business World is covering it. And Anurag, please do tell us a little bit about the Lit Fest that's also coming up before I introduce Ruchira.
Thank you, Sukriti. It's been a pleasure partnering with you and Sipping Thoughts for a long time. The only reason I'm sipping my green tea is because your company is called Sipping Thoughts. It
Yes.
did not specify what you need to sip, so I'm only sipping green tea. It's genuinely an honor and pleasure. And Ruchira, when first Sukirti told me about you, one of my classmates from the business school is called Ruchira Chaudhary. Now she's Ruchira Chaudhary Verma. She married another classmate of mine, Nilay, and Ruchira. So I said, he's written a book I don't know. I mean, it was like, but I then discovered you're a different Ruchira, and I got to know about you. So we're happy that we're chatting with you. The world needs coaches. Leaders need coaches. And I can say that Business World, this is the 40th year of Business World. We are a 30 million traffic site month on month, not counting our YouTube channel, not counting our communities, which is 17. We built 17 B2B communities. We just concluded a 5-day, 200 speaker BW hotelier event, 15,000 in audience. We're the number one B2B community hospitality, thanks to our CEO, Mr. Bhunesh Khanna, and his team, especially Ajit. And I can go on. We have a people community, which is not yet number one, but I promise you, when we talk to you in Ruchira in 6 to 8 months, we will be number one because we know what it takes to be building communities in education. So I don't want to, but I want to talk about the India Book Lit Fest that me and two friends of mine, Miss Aruna Katara, who's the chairperson of the Hope Foundation. She's the daughter of the founder of Finolex. She and a friend of ours, Samir Dua, we do it every year in Pune. This year, we will be doing it virtually. So it's 3 days, 26, 27, 28 of November. We'll have authors who written on business, global authors, global icons. We'd also invite you, Ruchira, to speak there. But let's get today started. Sukriti, over to you.
Awesome. And about this webinar, yes, I'm so excited because Ruchira will share her wisdom of over 22 years on what makes leaders unique and how they leverage coaching to their advantage to take their capability and performance a notch higher. She has coached C-level business leaders. And when I say C-levels, I mean the CXOs, the CEOs, the board members. And she has actually gleaned some powerful lessons and a lot of leadership insight. By the way of education, she has an MBA from the University of Chicago. So go University of Chicago, my alum, from the Booth School of Business with a concentration in strategy. Ruchira speaks English, Arabic, and French. But now she is also the author of an upcoming book, which is going to be published by Penguin, which is called Coaching the Secret Code to Uncommon Leadership. It is coming out in early 2021. So this webinar is very timely because we're getting those insights and we're getting them live from her. We hope that this webinar will help you understand, internalize, and utilize a wide array of important leadership skills, concepts, and ideas. Ruchira, now let's start with a basic question. I think everybody asks you probably this. How did you get started and how did you get into coaching?
You know, thank you so much. First and foremost, absolutely delighted, pleasure, privilege. Really appreciate you inviting me to this forum. I'm ecstatic to be able to share whatever wisdom and knowledge I've gleaned in the last many years. My foray into the world of coaching is not as dramatic as a lot of people describe. I would call it a bit accidental in some ways. So I've done a lot of work in the post merger integration space. I do a lot of consulting. I work with a lot of C level leaders. Uh, my sweet spots are organization redesign, transformation work. So my life was plodding along. I've done a fair bit of consulting work, in house work, and I was working for a large insurance organization. And let's just say things weren't going well. I was head of strategy and org design, and things weren't going well. So I decided I was going to leave. And around the time, I got a call from the University of Chicago, the Booth School of Business, which is also our alma mater, and they were looking for a coach. So I have to be honest, my first reaction was, I don't know what coaching is. Because, like I imagine a lot of you there, we all have very different ideas about what coaching is. To me, it was all about this very amorphous, fluid, almost intangible kind of thing. Remember, I went to the University of Chicago, which prides itself in economics and mathematics, and I have a concentration in strategy. So I was like, I can't do this kind of stuff.
It's too fuzzy.
Too fuzzy for me. So, sort of fast forward a bit, they said, come on board. And fortunately, despite all the drama in my current organization, the one thing my boss had done right for me was she was in New York and she'd got me certified in a whole lot of instruments. And through my career journey, I'd had all the leaders telling me that I was a great sounding board. They enjoyed talking to me. I somehow gave them clarity. So all of those basics notwithstanding, I didn't see myself as a coach, if that helps. So when U Chicago called me, I then went and joined them on campus for their accelerated development program in Singapore. So they were bringing the program to Singapore for the first time, which is where I lived for the last 14 years before I moved to India. And they said, let's do it as an experiment. You are ex-student. You will be able to seamlessly marry the classroom learnings to a business leader's current context because you actually led businesses. So I said, fine, let's give it a try. And obviously, I did something right. It all came together that now, 8 years later, I, I coach a lot of leaders. I coach through some of the best business schools, U Chicago, of course, but also Singapore Management University, the National University of Singapore, IMD. So this sort of, I guess, foray into the world of coaching, I've learned what coaching is. I'd love to tell you more, but I also think it's a deeply fulfilling experience because I think what I'm doing at a very basic level is helping untie a lot of knots in our head. It's streamlining it. We're all bright, enlightened people. We know what's right for us, but sometimes we just need somebody who can help you demystify all that going on, all the clutter, all the noise in our head. So that's really about coaching. Sorry.
Thank you, Ruchira. I just want to come in here. While I was researching for having a conversation with you, and Sukriti thinks I wake up and just come in front of a studio and start talking to the camera. I do research, I do sleep, I do a lot of things that human beings do. So I realized that you studied at the Narsi Monji, 95, 97.
Yeah.
Then you also have been to INSEAD. Then you've written for Mint for many years. You've written for 2 years and 9 months, if I remember. You've written for Harvard
Business Review, yes.
Business Review for a year and a couple of months.
Yes.
So you have an academic in you, right? You need an outlet to get your thoughts. Point
Yes.
I'm trying to ask is, what is the perfect DNA for a coach?
Honestly, Anurag, I don't know the answer. There are coaches that come from the world of HR who've been in training. There are people who've been in business, corporate leaders who one fine day decide that, they've had enough of the corporate world and this is the time that they should use their learnings. Then there are people who just have an epiphany one fine day. They wake up and say, I want to make the world a better place. So I'm not sure there's a right or wrong path. But I do say to people when they look for a coach, be very clear about what you're seeking in the coach. If you want someone who can understand your reality, then go for a coach who has a background, if not similar to yours, but someone who can appreciate your reality. someone who can put themselves in your shoes and help understand the stress or what you're going through at that juncture. So there are many criteria, but I don't know if there's a right answer. When coaches come in many shapes and forms, and at the end of the day, it's what works for you. But the job of your coach should be to make you a better person.
Yes. And and if you use the word accidental, I used to use this word for me, the accidental entrepreneur, but I call it now the serendipitous entrepreneur.
Good one.
Accidental has a kind of a negative connotation to
Correct.
it. Serendipity has a more positive connotation. Now, I know there is a saying that when you are ready, the guru appears, the coach appears.
Absolutely.
You have to be ready to receive, to learn, to evolve. And coach is a person that helps you become the best version of yourself. Now, before you can do that, you have to have a coach too. You have to become the best version of yourself. I mean, tell us, how have you become the best version of yourself? Who's your coach? And let me ask you some classic coaching questions. Let me kind of turn the tables on Ruchira. I want to ask you, what would you like to have achieved by the end of, let's say, this session, or the end of this year, or the end of next year?
Okay. This webinar is tougher than I thought. I'm put in a corner. So first part of your question, coaching. I've been very fortunate, though I have straddled the corporate, the academic, and the coaching sort of spheres, and the writing world, of course. I've been really lucky because I've had some fantastic influences through my career journey. They've come in the form of clients. They've been mentors that were people who taught me. My business school, in fact, I just did we did a very large seminar, a webinar with the University of Chicago, where they officially launched the book cover. And it was attended by 2 other academics from the University of Chicago. So in them, I have mentors. I also just have a lot of people who, just because of the goodness of their heart, colleagues, have helped me out. And I have truly valued that. And as a sole entrepreneur, which I am now, believe me, I have never appreciated this learning more than I have in the past. Even when I was in a corporate role with all the guardrails of structure, with people reporting into me, large teams, more than ever, as an entrepreneur or someone who's self-employed, I have appreciated the ability to have a sounding board. Someone who doesn't help you, help you show you the path, but guides you along. So I guess the key difference is they won't solve the problem for you, but they'll help you discover your own unique solution. And that's what a coach does for you. It's the asking, so how will you do this? As opposed to telling, this is how you do it. So a coach does a lot of asking, very little telling.
Coach is a lot about listening.
Yes.
Coach is a lot about kind of being a active, engaged listener, if I may use. I also want to ask you, again, COVID has taught me many things. The top 5 of them are, first of all, is never say never. Less is more.
Yeah.
Listen more. Go within. And ask yourself, since you know French, ask yourself, what is your raison d'être for being? What is your purpose?
Correct.
Right? So give us an instance of who have you been coaching? Of course, we don't want names, but I want to know one of your most fulfilling coaching moment and one of your most frustrating coaching moment.
Frustrating, I have many, many more. But with regard to the crises, it's amazing. As Churchill said, why waste a good crisis? It's amazing how many people have stepped up and become the kind of leaders you always hoped they would be. Perhaps they just didn't have the opportunity to let the light shine on them. So to me, the biggest, differentiator between what I call an average and an extraordinary leader, and I've been privileged to coach many of them. So I have 2 CEOs now. One of them runs a large logistics organization. And for them, what he's done is he truly has taken his company along. They have pivoted. They found a completely different business model. But the reason I'm telling you all that is I was impressed at how he did that. It's a very traditional organization, a lot of command and control. You typically tell people what to do. Also, the business lends itself to, it's routine jobs. you do what you do every day. However, with this pandemic, and when there's so much uncertainty, it's like staring into an abyss and not knowing when you'll see light at the end of that. He has taken the collective intelligence of his people. So he has really encouraged people to come up with ideas, something they didn't do as an organization. It was frowned upon. He spends 5 to 6 p.m. every single day. Work from home, you can call him. Any idea that you have will never be dismissed. And believe it or not, over the last many months, they've collected some of the most fantastic ideas and they've launched themselves into a completely new business space. And not only have they launched themselves, they are not just surviving, they're thriving. And he said to me, I wanted to do this so long back, but there was almost so much resistance because everybody said, we're in the logistics business. Why would we foray outside? But he said, this pandemic gave me the opportunity. With all my people working from home, all of them, being as stressed as they were, I said, this is a time to ask them to step up. And people loved it. So.
Most frustrating?
It's from the business school that both Sukirti and I went to. So I should say this. It's not the pandemic, but I want to go back to the bit I told you about the coaching. I think a lot of times we don't know why we want to coach. So I've had instances where I've met some really interesting leaders, but I had this very interesting gentleman who had a spouse, as many of us do, and a mistress in a different part of the world. And he was very stressed because
Same person, different.
Huh? Sorry?
Same person, spouse and mistress, or different?
The same person had a spouse and probably many mistresses. I don't know how many, but he was
clearly very good at work. He could delegate and still have so many mistresses. I think that's the lesson we have to learn from him. Not having mistresses is the lesson I'd like to learn. But you have to be go good at work. That you have to leave work and do this. And go on. It's very interesting.
So the thing is, a lot of times people think coaches are like these therapists, right? I know it's very cathartic. You can talk about your private lives, which you should because it's a safe space. But you can't expect a coach to actually help you resolve this way. Firstly, I'm not equipped to do it, as you probably know. And this is not part of my professional domain, right?
Not with your value system.
Not with my value system.
For example, I may not see it as a part of my value system, right? So sometimes there is internal resistance. It's like subconscious. Sometimes there is a meeting I don't want to go for, and I'm pushed, and that day I fall ill. I mean, I haven't done anything. It's just that the consciousness kind of pulls you back because you're not all in, because there's something that you do are uncomfortable about it. It can
Absolutely.
be a bit of that.
So I've got those. I've had those that there was a very interesting.
They confuse the coach with the therapist. So let me say on this.
Coach with the couch.
Yeah.
So
that's an interesting title for your next book. Don't confuse the coach with the couch. By the way, Sukriti, we still have to give the names of the book to Mrs. Anu Aga.
Yes, we do. I'm sure she's breathlessly waiting for our title.
Knowing the kind of person she won't forget. Right? So go on, Ruchira. Sukriti, all yours. Go ahead.
Perfect. So, Ruchira, we can get started also.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. So,
Ruchira, before you do this presentation, let me remind you, I've been saying for 10 years that PowerPoint presentations are done by people who are neither powerful nor have a point of view. But Ruchira Chaudhary is an exception.
No, it's not really a presentation. You'll see just a few words, and I prefer to talk non-stop. So I thought it might be good for the participants to get a little.
But you're very much below average, Ruchira. You're very much below average. You've done 2 MBAs, much below average.
Without much ado, we'll just go through the slides, but the slide just has a caption and there's nothing more to it. So just sort of as we get into these 10 powerful lessons, there are many more lessons I've learned, but neither time nor the context allows us to go too deep. So I've chosen a few that really resonated with me. These are all the learnings I've gleaned with partnering, advising, counseling, and also being counseled by some of the best leaders that I've come across. And if some of you read my profile, I've moved back to India only recently after 15 years of being away. So a lot of the work I've done is in Asia Pacific. I was in Singapore, but also in Japan, in that subcontinent, and in North Africa. I've worked in Algeria, in Tunisia, and extensively in Europe. So I speak some languages well, some very badly. And so a lot of the experiences that I have gleaned also have that cultural context about them. Okay. So without much ado, I just literally want to talk a little bit about the coaching that I'm referring to. So, if you hit Google, you'll get some 900,000 or more hits on what coaching is. It could be more. I checked about a year ago when I was writing the book. But the way I've described coaching and the way I talk about it is simply a process whereby a coach, could be a leader, it could be an external coach like me, tries to maximize the performance and potential of others through a series of non-directive, self-enabling conversations. Now, the operative word here is non-directive, self-enabling, which is what I'm saying is you're not telling people what to do. You help them find their path. You don't find the path for them. And if you guys are interested, this sort of the trivia to this is the word coaching actually came from a village in Hungary called Crocs. It was a metaphor for the coach, the modern day coach that that took somebody from point A to point B. So the same coach, which is now today a modern day usage for taking somebody along a journey, helping somebody, an individual, maximize his or her goals. That's what a coach does. Whether it's in the world of sport, whether it's a tutor, as we know with our children, and also in the corporate world. So that's really coaching, and it has taken many shapes and forms. But at the core of coaching, the essence is it's non-directive, it's self-enabling. People have to find their own path. Okay, so quickly, let me just go through those 10 lessons. As you can see, the whole sort of, we are all very informal out here. So if you feel that something needs more clarity, feel free to put your question in the chat. So Kirti will send it my way. Okay, so lesson 1, they ask, they don't tell. That's pretty much, I think, the crux of what some of the best leaders do. They constantly harness the collective intelligence of their people. So the story sort of dates back several centuries, right? Growing up, we were sort of taught that a leader always had the answers. You told people what to do, you've done it before, you were successful at it, so now everybody has to follow that path. So it was a given. Businesses were simpler. We did manufacturing, engineering. They were consistent, repeatable businesses. You knew exactly how to maximize productivity. Life went on. Now what's happened is, as we're evolving at the turn of the World War II, these businesses got a little more complex, right? We had offshore operations, we had some manufacturing, some sales outside of your home countries. You were no longer, limited to the home domains. And as time went by, we became even more complex, right? Now we're quickly shifting into different domains, AI, digitization. What we have today is a very complex ecosystem. And to think that in this rather complex domain, a leader could actually have all the answers is a bit of a fallacy, right? So leaders that truly are extraordinary understand that they cannot have all the answers. They should not have all the answers. So they surround themselves with experts. They give people the chance to speak their mind, to voice their opinion, to innovate. However, a lot of organizations tend to lag behind in the mindset, not into. So you still follow the command and control style where you're telling people what to do, as opposed to asking them. So the leaders that I've met over the years, who I think have been completely fantastic in this domain, have one thing at the core of their leadership, which is keep people at the center of everything, take them along in the journey, empower them, elevate them, and constantly ask them questions. Be curious. To me, in a nutshell, that's asking and not telling. Yeah. The lesson 2. Okay, they take decisions and they take others with them. You look at a slide like this, to Anurag's point, it's a basic slide. Of course, a leader needs to take decisions, but the key is different. Again, in these very complex, complicated organizations, you have to balance taking decisions in a nimble, in a very agile way. You have to take quick decisions, but you also need all the information, the inferences to take the decision, right? And to be able to do that, you need to take people along in the journey. And one of the more interesting facets is this process of decision making and taking people along in the journey can be very different depending on which culture you're operating in. So let me give you the example that I use a lot because of Japan, where I worked extensively and also lived briefly. Um, if you're a leader, if you're an Indian leader, heaven help you, or in Japan, a lot of you will realize that things don't happen very quickly, right? They use a process called it's called nemawashi, which literally means that before you plant anything in the soil has to be readied, and each portion of that root has to be cleaned, and which means that every time you put a proposal forward, you need to ensure that every single stakeholder is in agreement. However, you take that proposal to a meeting, people will say, they'll nod, but that doesn't mean they'll agree to it. So what you need to do is you have to meet them in smaller groups, one-on-one meetings, because you'll never get this consensus in a group meeting, which may be very different from what we're used to in India or even the United States, right? So if you're an Indian leader or even an American leader, this is where your skill as a leader comes in. You embrace a cultural context. You understand what makes people tick and what makes your decision one that will be agreed upon by others. You have to take people along with you. Now, take a corollary to this. I met this really interesting gentleman from Mexico. It's also an HBR case study. And he was doing a fantastic job in Mexico, but he was then sent to Amsterdam, to the headquarters. And his biggest challenge was that every time he would put forward a proposal, everybody would poke holes in it and said, this is not okay. Have you thought about this? And that poor man, he was always so frustrated. In fact, once he wrote a note saying, I'm the boss. Nobody seems to get it. Where is the respect? So here's the deal. If you are Dutch, the whole idea of consensus is that you ask questions. You don't just take whatever the boss tells you is the right way. You're constantly debating, discussing, and nobody takes offense, right? That's just the Dutch way of doing things. And let's call this gentleman Carlos. It took Carlos a very long time to get the hang of this. I imagine wouldn't be very different if it was somebody with, like me, with Indian origin as well. Because we want to move fast. We have this notion about the boss and people will typically be subservient to you. It doesn't work like that. So both these cultures, whether it's Japan or whether it's the Dutch folks I'm telling you about, it's a consensus-based culture, but the consensus comes very differently. In one case, you do these smaller meetings, and in the other one, you have this broader forum where you debate and discuss, right? So that's what I mean by lesson 2. It's you have to take these decisions, you have to take people along with you. If you have any questions, please, happy to answer them now or later.
Ruchira, I do have questions. So what would you do in the Indian context then? Because, we like to take the decision.
Yeah. And, the challenge is not so much when you're here in India, you take the decision. It doesn't mean you take people with you. It doesn't mean that people truly buy into what you've done. And there is where the problem lies. Transpose an Indian leader into one of these contexts that we talked about. It'll be equally challenging. But this is also not about stereotyping people. It's about saying that the amazing leaders that I've met and some of the best leaders understand the cultural context. They understand that we shouldn't live by these stereotypes, that you may have been brought up with certain sensibilities, but the times are changing. And you have to now think harder about how people will become part and parcel of all your decision making, how it will impact them, and how you need to harness the collective intelligence time and again.
Anurag, you had a question?
So I had a question and a comment quick. That's why Japanese I've been to Japan only once in 2010. And I feel Japanese take a lot more time to take decisions than Indians do, much more. They think through, they try to build consensus, they get into granularity, so on and so forth. Second is, I don't know which Carlos you were talking to you, but imagine if you were talking about Carlos Ghosn. I think he needed a leader or a teacher or a coach. I don't know what the coach would do, because sometimes these CEOs and promoters become these superstars that we all look up to, and they're as human as us. They have flaws, and I'm sure you know about Dr. Brené Brown. She wrote this beautiful book, The Gifts of Imperfection. We all are imperfect. Now, that's where the value of intent and ethics comes. Imperfection is okay. Intent and ethics should be okay. So anyway,
Absolutely.
go on.
I've seen a question come up before I get on to the third one, which somebody's asking me, very rightly so. What if consensus is not forthcoming? And yes, very often consensus does not come through. You need to take a call at which juncture. Uh, we can go on and on doing these memomarshis, but there is a point where you have to stop it. You have to take your leadership team along with you. And let's face it, not every decision needs a consensus approach, right? You have to be discerning enough to understand what needs to be taken down the value chain, and which decisions are truly executive decisions. That which you need to as a leader. You need to take a decision on that, for the lack of a better word. Moving on. So a lot of leaders do a lot, but one of the few things that truly stand out, especially as a leader coach, is providing clarity and inspiring confidence. Let's look at our current situation. We're in the throes of this pandemic of biblical proportions. Um, it's not a complicated problem. It's a complex problem. And let me explain what I mean. A complicated problem is linear. One step, second step, third step, you come to a solution. You have best practices, people have done it before. So someone somewhere has done it before and can offer you a solution. When you have a complex problem like the one that we're facing today, nobody has an answer. We're all stressed, we're uncertain, and naturally you're worried about yourselves, you're worried about your families. Will I have a job tomorrow? You're looking at your leaders to give you that confidence and that clarity. Now, that doesn't mean as a leader, you also know what's going on, but it is truly your role to provide that sense of calm and confidence because they're looking at you for cues. It's about acknowledging that we don't have all the answers. This is what we know, and this is what we don't know. But we are here for you. We are in this together, and we'll ride the storm together whenever the storm ends. It's about acknowledging that we all have a different reality. But as a leadership team, we are committed to helping you come out of this unscathed. Now, a lot of people asked me in the previous webinar that I did, does that mean you're sugarcoating the truth? The truth is, you can't lie to people. So when you say confidence, it's bounded optimism, or I call it cautious optimism. Yes, there are many jobs that are getting lost. Things are changing for people. So you can't tell them it's going to be perfect. We'll all be a happy family again. Everything will be perfect. It doesn't work like that. But you need to give them the assurance that here and now, we'll bring you all the information. We'll give you all the data points. We'll ensure that we separate fact from fiction, that we're in this together. That's the kind of confidence you need to provide. And you need to provide clarity on next steps, on the immediate controllables. Yeah. Okay, so that's an HBR cover. Sorry, academic in me had to do this.
I read this.
Yeah, so the one thing that I found very interesting is, as leaders, we're constantly saying, we want our people to innovate, we want our people to constantly look at new ways of doing things. And that's fantastic. I mean, kudos to you if you're doing that. The bigger challenge is, on the one hand, you can say we are experimenting, we're finding new ways of doing things, more efficient ways of doing things. But how do we actually cascade a culture that allows people to do that? If you are constantly penalizing them for making mistakes, will they be encouraged to take these steps? Unless you create a safe space for them, unless you give them psychological safety, then listen, we are behind you. Go ahead, experiment. It's okay if you fail. Not fail every time, but if you fail a few times, we have your back. That's the kind of culture you have to encourage. And that's what some of the best leaders do. They're constantly egging people on, but they're also saying, listen, we get it. We won't be successful in the first time or maybe the second time. But as an organization, we are committed to experimenting, finding different paths, doing these iterations of trial and error to eventually maybe come up with something that's absolutely fantastic.
Ruchira, I have a question here because I find this is the most paradoxical thing. We all say that we want experimentation, But like you said, as soon as someone fails, we just do not like it. We're like, I told you so, this shouldn't have happened. We're not able to say that, okay, in probability or risk taking, that so many things will fail. So how does a leader develop that mindset?
It's hard work, Sukirti, which is why these leaders are truly extraordinary leaders. Organizations that have excelled in cascading cultures don't just do it, it's not just lip service. They embed this in everything they do and say, which means the way they communicate with their people, the way they evaluate their people, the incentives that they have. All of this ensures that people have the ability to experiment and do things differently. So let me explain what I mean. If your incentives are very closely, or your KPIs are very closely linked to achievement of four tangible goals, and if you fail, then that impacts your compensation. Would you be inspired to, try and do things which are really not part of your remit, because you'll get penalized for it? So
Yes.
it has to go back to the architecture of your organization, which essentially includes the way you're structured, but also the way you compensate people, the way you reward behavior, and the way you reward performance. So if people that experiment and have done interesting stuff, if you applaud them, if you publicly say this is fantastic, we want other people to do that, when you encourage people to do that, that's a sign. When you ensure that you don't have stringent linkages of their KPIs to reward, without any element to explore the slack, it doesn't work. So you have to go back to the drawing board and ensure that you integrate it in what we call, academics, the organization arc, the architecture, the routines. It's how often you meet, how well you meet, and the culture of the organizations. So once you embed that, is when you can truly have a culture that embodies, whether it's experimentation, whether it's doing new things differently.
Thank you.
I have a comment here. You just go back. This is a theme I've been talking about for 15 years, 50, and now that I have little young adult children, I mean, it puts it in perspective. My daughter just turned 16 and she's already won 3 entrepreneurship awards. Clearly, only for one reason. She shares a birthday with her father, no other reason. Uh, uh, and, I crack this joke in front of my wife, so it's okay. But on a serious note, I read this book called The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch.
Mm-hmm.
And he says something that I've been repeating. He died 9 or 10 years back, 8 years, 9. And he said, experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. So, there's nothing called failure. It is an experimentation. It is an experience. And I keep saying India hasn't built a single product company because we celebrate success. We don't celebrate failure. So I'm going to do a failcon. I don't know who to invite. Rahul Gandhi, keynote speaker. But I'll invite somebody. Okay. Because, on a serious note, Rahul Gandhi hasn't failed. He's trying.
He's trying. Yeah,
I'm not a
absolutely.
political person. I'm just saying there's nothing called failure. And by only experimenting, you find new sweet spot, business models, ideas, and never say never. Pandemic has taught us never say never. And I also angel invest. I told myself 6, 7 years back, don't say this won't work, because Anurag, you don't know. You're coming back from a baggage. You don't know what will work. Otherwise, you would have created Facebook, LinkedIn. So clearly, I keep saying we have to learn from old people what not to do, and we have to learn from young people what to do. We have to do reverse mentoring, and that is experimentation in some way.
When you mean old people, were you referring to yourself or to me? I'm just curious.
No, clearly I'm very young. I'm very young.
Neither of us, right?
I was
That's
referring
okay.
to
That's
other
okay.
people.
That's okay.
There are
That's
other
fine.
people I won't take their name. Like
Good.
my father, like my mother. But that's the same answer because they're not really inspired about whatever they say.
Right, okay. Okay. This, I put this out. I know a lot of people will say, what does this mean? There were too many things here. Free falling is pretty much what we're doing right now. It's falling off the edge of the cliff. It's unknown. And what happens in times like now, and we've talked about this briefly, this is a mammoth sort of, crisis. We don't know when this is going to end. We don't know we'll come out of it in one piece, if we'll all be fine eventually. At a time like this, leaders have to practice vulnerability, which means you have to acknowledge, honestly, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. And this is the time to let go. It's the time to relinquish control and say, let people come up with the best ideas to pivot, ideas to work together, ideas to do things differently. The trouble is that history tells us every time there is a crisis, even the best leaders go back to the command and control mode. Because for them, they feel that, oh my God, how can we not succeed? We need to have all the answers, we need to get all the information, we need to tell people what to do. But on the other hand, this is an opportunity for you to trust your people. This is an opportunity for you not to micromanage. This is an opportunity for you, for all these people that are working from home, for whom this transition was so abrupt, so sudden. Many of them have screaming kids and barking dogs, and sometimes even screaming spouses, making their lives miserable. This is a time for you to trust them that they're doing their job. So, free falling into the unknown is about being a courageous leader. It's about taking courageous decisions and believing that your people will deliver the goods. It's about trusting people. That's what it means. It's the trust, which unfortunately surveys time and again are telling us that less than 70% of your employees trust you, and they feel you're constantly checking in on them, you're constantly watching them, you're constantly micromanaging them. That's what it means. Go into the abyss. So the very closely related to the first point is empathy. And it's a much abused word. People confuse it with sympathy. Listen, empathy is not being nice or kind. Empathy is understanding the reality of your people. It's understanding that while all of us today may be in the same storm, it's a crazy storm, but we're not in the same boat. We somehow believe that we're in the same boat, but it's not true. Our realities can be very different. Some of us have spotty Wi Fi connections, we have dimly lit backgrounds, we have spaces which are not the same. As I said earlier, screaming kids. I mean, fortunately, mine doesn't scream as much, but yeah, their kids and their dogs and there's lots more going on in our lives, which may be different for each individual. Empathy means putting yourself in their shoes and understanding that their realities are different, appreciating those realities, which means not fixing calls at the time that's convenient to you. It's understanding what might work for your team members. It could be as simple as saying that every call doesn't need to be a Zoom call, right? We'll do these once a day formal meeting calls, but our check-ins could be just a simple phone call, like we did in the good old days, where we just talk to each other. Why does somebody have to be looking picture perfect for a Zoom call? There are lots of little things you can do as a leader to show your empathy. And even before this pandemic hit us, I remember those days when we were doing these calls, transatlantic calls. There were people from the US and UK and us in India and Singapore. There were those that would speak up and say, listen, let's find a time that works for everybody. And you knew they were empathetic. But there were those that never cared. It was always about their schedules. So these are the little things you can do as a leader, and the best leaders actually do that. They stand out for that. Moving on. I guess a lot of you who are interested in this and coaching, one of the prerequisites of getting coached and coaching others is to be a self-aware leader, which means it's not enough to say that we'll point out the blind spots of your people. You have to be cognizant that I think, as Anurag said earlier, nobody's perfect. It's time for some reflection. It's time to understand, what could I do differently as a leader? And some of the best leaders that I've worked with, that I've coached, ask 3 questions. How am I doing? What kind of support can I give you? And what can I do better? And they ask these questions regularly. You can do it in anonymous forums. You can do it with people you trust. But the point is, keep asking what you can to do better as a leader. Because unless you are self-aware, you can't make the people that work with you, for you, aware of their own strengths and weaknesses. The next one, the next lesson that we're talking about going on from this is, while we reflect, we also have to be consistent. It sounds like a very simplistic argument, but I don't know about you guys, but I've had this throughout my career. I've had bosses who've been fantastic one day. We've sort of gone through the entire proposal. Everything's been perfect. Then I don't hear anything from a few days. And then 4 days later, they're just completely upset because they sat through the proposal and now they don't like it anymore. Or they've had a huge fight with one of their spouses and you feel that the frustration is taken out on you. So you constantly have to, you gingerly make your way around them. If you feel that you need to discuss something important, then you ask, is this a good time to trouble the boss? You think the boss is in a good mood? It doesn't have to be that way. A leader, an amazing leader, or one that coaches, needs to be consistent in all that he or she does. Because as a role model, you need to lead by example. You cannot let your ego, your emotions get in the way of how you behave with your people. You have to be your authentic self. And that means that you can't keep changing tact
No,
without giving rationale.
so sometimes this does happen though, that you actually reflect back and you say, you know what,
Mm.
maybe in that moment you said yes, that was a great idea, but maybe when you yourself as a leader reflected, realized that maybe this is not really gelling together.
Yeah. Sorry. Was that a question for me,
Yes,
Sukirti?
so how do
Yeah.
you deal with that?
Can you just repeat that for me?
So sometimes as a leader, in the spur of the moment, you may say, oh, yes, it looks good. But when you yourself reflect, you come back and say, well, no, it wasn't really coming together. How do you
Yes.
go back and say, okay, you know what? My earlier decision was not correct. And
Yes.
maybe this is the
Yeah.
decision I would like.
And so, absolutely, if things have changed, and they do, right? It's a very dynamic world. Things are changing. We have new information every day. By all means. But I think the key here is you need to explain the rationale to your people. You need to say what changed. Why have we changed tack completely? Because often what we do is we go from point A to point C without telling people what happened in between. And that's where the problem lies. Because consistency is also about communication. To be consistent means you be the same. You've had a conversation, you've agreed to certain principles, then you've done a complete U turn. But you haven't explained what caused you to turn like that. And that causes stress in the system, which I think is the crux of being consistent. I
Thank you.
mean, I don't know if we have the ability to do this, but has anyone heard about the growth mindset? It's a very popular word these days. Satya Nadella has talked a lot about it in his book Hit Refresh. If if you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it because I've borrowed a lot from him. He's also, like Sukirti and me, an alum from the University of Chicago, so clearly we are biased. And he talks a lot in the book about how when the book was gifted to him, growth mindset is a concept which is propagated by Carol Dweck. And she's a psychologist of a lot of some fame, really, and her growth mindset theory has now being touted in many international forums. Basically, it's a difference between saying I'm born with a certain set of skills, I'm brilliant at something, and that's really it, and I can better that. Or you can come with this inherent belief that I have these skills, but I have to work harder. I can actually take them to the next level by working a lot more harder, by grit, by determination. Because the latter category believes that things can change, while the first category is a lot more concerned about, if I fail, will that be okay? What will people think if I fail? The second category isn't concerned. For them, failure is another opportunity to really understand they can become better and become a better version of themselves. And a lot of these leaders, I mean, it was a concept I didn't know about, but now that I look back at a lot of the conversations I've had with them, they constantly talk about doing better, embracing a growth mindset. It's about looking into the horizon, constantly saying, yes, of course it can happen. Of course it can happen. We can make it happen. Even the most absurd ideas. And sometimes they do make it happen. And that's what it is. Okay, so I just basically want to sum it all up. It was back to the book, Coaching the Secret Code to Uncommon Leadership. The secret sauce, in my mind, for a lot of these extraordinary leaders is they're coaching their people every day. And the coaching that we're talking about is not this structured coaching, this appointment that you make in your calendar 3 months in advance, where you sit across the table. That's coaching too. But everything that you do, it's those meeting in the hallways and the corridors. which sadly is now being replaced by Zoom for the interim. But the corridors, the hallways, the check-ins that you do with people, the car rides that you may have with them, or a taxi ride in a really crowded Mumbai or Delhi or Bangalore, these are the moments when you can give them feedback on a great meeting or even a not so great meeting. It's the constant checking in. It's the clarity that you give them. It's the consistency that you give them. It's the ability to take them along in the journey. That's coaching too, because coaching is not just sitting across the table and going through an agenda. And the best leaders embrace that. They understand that, and they truly make people a better version and more capable than the people themselves thought they were capable of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruchira. Anurag, any comments before we open it up to the audience Q&A? So, Anurag, your voice.
Unmute me.
Thank you. Yes, we have unmuted you.
By the way, unmute is the second most used word of 2020, first being COVID. And though I live in a progressive country, in a progressive city, and in a progressive locality, we are joined by the fact that electricity goes in this. And it takes 2-3 minutes for the power backup to come back, then 1 or 2 minutes for the internet to come back. So I lost my electricity. It has happened to me twice yesterday.
Oh boy.
So from tomorrow on, I've always kept a backup. So if it happens in one location, somebody else can take over. So here, luckily, you are there. So I didn't see the more parts of your 10 points, but I want to ask you 2 questions, quick ones. One is, you can't let people have drinking water or amrit or knowledge from an empty vessel. What do you do yourself to be able to upgrade yourselves, to be able to get experiences, wisdom, stay contemporary, understand technology, so that you can really have a glass from which others can drink, so to say, right? What do you do to retool yourself, to equip yourself, to prepare yourself?
Is this a question specifically for me, or is it a generic question? What people should do?
See, the coach has to
Okay.
himself,
Got it.
Be very,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's like having money in your pocket to be able to give it to somebody.
No, absolutely. And to be fair, it's not just a coach. I think you will realize that as you meet some of the best leaders, great leaders, they will tell you that your learning never stops. And if there's one thing that you have to constantly keep doing is to recalibrating, refreshing. It's because the same ideas that which we led or coached in the past also change, they evolve, right? So reading, of course, we all read, but it's also the ability to listen to people. It's to embrace different points of view, often very diverse points of view. So you have to be very, very aware of the world around you. I'm going back to the piece about cultural nuances. It's one thing to say that, oh, I'm now based in India. So I coach a lot more leaders in India that I used to in the past, where I was constantly in the Middle East or in North Africa. But that doesn't mean, with all the globalization, with all the changes, we are constantly shifting and moving, and people are moving to different geographies, right? So I think one of the other interesting aspects is to constantly be aware of different cultural contexts, to read about them, to understand how people view coaching in different contexts, how people are receptive to coaching, what makes them tick. So as a coach, I'm constantly trying to assimilate it. Even if I'm the reason I speak a few languages, by the way, I speak them very badly, I have to be honest. The only reason I speak them is when I lived briefly in Doha or when I was in Algeria for a long time, I made it my business to try and understand some keywords because I realized that endeared me to a lot of the local people. The more attempts you make to say a language, even if it's really badly, people open up to you. And that sort of has worked for me. So I'm constantly trying to read about different cultures, what works, what doesn't work for them. I've interviewed a lot of people in the course of writing my book. So that opened up a lot of my own horizons and my own learning. And the best of that I've tried to bring in that book. So to your point, yes, the learning can't stop. It's the reading, it's meeting.
Oh. And you learn from each coaching session.
Absolutely.
experiential learning of coaching a CEO or an entrepreneur.
Exactly.
But last question before SG can bring in all the audience questions is, which are the coaches you look up to? You know, when Tendulkar was asked, "Oh, you're the greatest cricketer of all time," he said, you know, he was very humble and he said, "I think Sir Donald Bradman is the greatest cricketer of time." Sachin clearly is, but he was very humble enough to say, you know, because he broke Sir Donald Bradman's record of 31 centuries. He was so humble because Sachin is not a human being; he's a god. You know, he was so humble. So I'd like you. It's your Sachin Tendulkar moment. Which are the coaches that you look up to?
Since you brought up the example of cricket, let me take that forward. I grew up in a family in Delhi where everybody's crazy about cricket. I'm not as crazy, but I didn't have a choice in the matter because everybody was always talking about cricket. So when I wrote the book, I actually used a lot of analogies from cricket. And I have to be honest, while Sachin is perhaps the best batsman the world has ever seen, as a captain, he didn't quite make it to being anywhere close to the best. And let's go back to why. Some of the best performers, stellar performers, don't always automatically morph into the best leaders or the best coaches. Because the qualities or the traits that we look for in a high performer, the aggression, the passion, the dynamism, that doesn't always translate itself into taking people along in the journey. Sachin's, if you read his biography, his story is slightly different. He is such a genius. He's so focused on his craft that he frankly didn't want the burden of the captaincy. He continued to do his individual performance fabulously, but the minute you put that burdens of the captaincy on him, his own performance started to dwindle. And he acknowledges that. But by comparison, if you see a Dhoni or even if you see a Kohli, a lot of cricket people might point fingers at me. Some of these people are not as fantastic players, but they morph themselves into some of the best captain coaches we've seen because they enjoy leading. They love the ability to shine and take people along in the journey. So the mindset or the traits that make for a fantastic performer don't always make for a fantastic captain or in the corporate context, a fantastic leader.
Fantastic. Damini, can you start us off with the question?
Ruchira, just to build on it, I and my daughter share the birthday with Sir Donald Bradman. So I just wanted to tell you that. Too.
I'm sure he's a fantastic coach. I just don't know him that well.
He's a great batsman, though. And there is, lots of questions that Sukriti will take forward. One or two really good questions.
Damini, go ahead.
Yes, hi ma'am, amazing session, and there are a lot of questions that are coming in, but particularly there are a lot of questions that are coming in related to coaching. So how about I combine them and ask you them together because you're running out of time as well.
Sure.
Firstly, people would like to know, they've been asking, how to build the coaching mindset. Do you make a choice of who would you like to coach and who would you not coach? And some lessons for coaches, if you can share.
Sure. Yeah. Shall we attack them one by one? There were quite a few questions.
Yes, sure. So how to build a coaching mindset?
Yeah. So the first
the best question, all questions are good, but one question you must take: do you make a choice? When would you like to coach someone, and when you like to say no? And what is that thought process in your mind that goes? I think that's the best question. All our other are super good, but that's the Sachin Tendulkar of a question.
Okay, so let's start with that question about have I ever said no? I have been quite fortunate that I've never said no, but let me just tell you how I start. Every time I get engaged in a coaching assignment, my premise is very simple. Whatever I'm charging, let's not go there. The first 30 minutes is complimentary, whether it's the work that I've done for the University of Chicago or SMU, etc. That 30 minutes is on me. And that 30 minutes is for me to gauge the individual and for the individual to gauge me, right? It's just not about the chemistry, but we both have to be aligned that we truly have to move the needle on the person's performance and potential. And unless there's a commitment from that person, to actually be doing so. And it doesn't matter if the person turns around and say, I want to do it, but I don't think I'd like you. Probably won't say that to me, but subtly. Then that's off. That's understandable. So I have consciously tried to ensure that there is that 30, 40-minute window where we meet each other, where we get to know each other. And if it doesn't work out, then that's okay too. So I've been fortunate. There is a category of people that truly believe that they know it all. They don't need a coach, and often the coach is being thrust by the organization, right? It's part of a program or a leadership program. So you often come across that variety, and they're very, very cynical in the beginning. Like, I've been there, I've done lots of coaching sessions. So yes, I've come across those. But my sort of conversation with them is very similar. I said, listen, the organization's paid for these sessions. It's entirely up to you. If you feel that we can make something out of it, even if I'm not as good as your previous coach, I'll do my best. But if it doesn't work out, then you can do better stuff with your time. And for me, it's just always been, people have always come back and said, thank you. Even those that have been very cynical have just come back and said it's worked out. But yes, you do have the oddball where people just don't want to be coached, they don't care for it. Because coaching is a two-way street. You cannot force somebody to get coached. And coaching is not just cheerleading or saying, hey, fantastic job, oh, that's lovely. That's not what you do as a coach. There is often tough love. If you want people to become a better version of themselves, you have to show them parts of their, I guess, leadership aura that may be hidden from them, and that's what you do. So you have to accept that you won't take any kind of feedback personally, and the best leaders get that, and some don't. Right. Okay. So second question. Now I've lost my flow.
Yeah, so a lot of questions, around, lessons for coaches as well, because you've given lessons from the experience of coaching leaders, but lesson for coaches. And there's one very interesting question, and this would be the last question that we take is, how does one encourage learning from failure? Because we have been programmed to, think that failure is bad and, it's a letdown and everything. How do you encourage someone to learn from failure?
There is an easy answer for that, and I'm guilty also. Uh, so there are two ways of doing this. It's an organizational and a leadership mindset. You have to truly believe that failing is just a stepping stone to other successes. So I go back to my point. You have to create psychological safety in an organization, whether it's an organization or if you're a coach coaching the individual. You have to reiterate that failing is not the end of the world. You just haven't reached your destination just yet. You're on your way to getting there. And in fact, there's a lot of research. If you're whoever's asked that question, who's interested in it, a lot of research which is telling us increasingly the way we give feedback also has to change. For those who are just starting out in their journey, the feedback has to be a lot less critical. We need to encourage people to say failing is natural. But if you're giving the same feedback to, let's say, an expert, someone who's been around and done that, you can give them specific feedback on their technique, because they have the ability to not personalize that feedback and take that failure very personally. So a lot depends on the skill of the leader or the coach in terms of how we give that feedback around failure in the first place. So it's a culture of the organization, it's the individual who's coaching you, and it's also your leader. Those messages need to get reiterated, that failure is not the end of the road. It's just a path to the destination.
It's an experience.
Yes. Anurag, with that, I'd like you to say some closing words before we ask Ruchira for her last tip.
Ruchira, I can only say that, I want to ask, I'm learning, I'm a student, I have stayed in the Narsi Monji hostel. I was the head of placements for my college in India. MDI was known, but not as well known as it is today. Of course, I got in when the quality control was bad. I'm from the first batch. And the quality control in some areas is still bad. They made me the chairman of the alumni, now board of governors of MDI also. So I observe people. When I was at MDI, there was a certain professor called Dr. Poonam Sehgal. I did a course called the Personal Growth Lab, which is like going within, asking yourself tough questions. Culturally in India, we don't like to ask ourselves tough questions. So what is the difference between coaching an Indian CEO entrepreneur versus, say, any other part of the world?
the coach is the same. So this coach asks tough questions regardless.
Culturally, how it is received, because culturally we don't.
Yeah. So I think you're right. Without stereotyping, some cultures are more accepting of feedback and tougher questions. They tend to separate the person from the problem. So when you pose a question to them, or when you tell them, how do you think this could be done better? Because truly things are not going as per, as per plan. A lot of them get very flustered and think, oh, it's a reflection of my abilities as a leader, right? So I think that goes back to the skill of the coach. You have to separate the person from the problem. You have to make it non-threatening. And you will see that a lot of that play out in the Southeast Asian world, where you see it. India is one, but also in other parts of Southeast Asia, you lose face, right? It's an affront. So you have to tread carefully. And I'm going back to that cultural context piece. I think more than ever, we need to be cognizant of the culture that we're operating in, the nuances, the spoken words, the unspoken words, what is said and what is not said. And that, to me, is the true skill of a coach or a leader who's operating in a different environment than the one that you're from.
Ruchira, we are always, of course, out of time. A lovely session. One last tip before we sign off for the evening. Ruchira, one last tip.
Oh, tip from me. Okay.
Yes, of course.
Sorry, other one more question.
If I know going to university,
Anurag too. Last tip from you, Anurag.
I want to say to the audience, if you don't want to lose hair, go to University of Chicago. If you want to lose hair, go to MBI. Just wanted to give you the deduction, but anyway.
Okay, this is a new one for me. I learned that, but yeah.
That's Anurag's tip, and what's yours?
I'll just say this. I mean, coach your way to uncommon leadership. And the way we talk about coaching, it's not coaching for a manager or just aspiring manager. When Penguin sent me this very nice email, I'm a very inert human being. I would have never written the book, honestly, if the business editor at Penguin had not read my columns at the Mint, which was titled The Leader as Coach. They sent me a very nice note, and it said, by writing this book, if we can even transition a few managers to leaders, we would have done a great service to society. And this book and a lot of what we talked about today truly is about that. It's not about you being a senior manager, a young manager. You could be an entrepreneur, somebody who owns a small business. You could be an individual contributor. Everybody can embrace coaching in their lives. It's about taking people along in the journey. It's about asking them. It's not always telling them. And as you take people along in the journey, as you empower them, as you elevate them, you also elevate yourself. I think for me, that's the crux of what we talked about today.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruchira. Thank you, Anurag. Thank you all for joining us for this excellent session. It will be available on Business World. It will be available on Sipping Thoughts, so you can go back. I know a lot of you have asked for the slides, so it has been streamed live, so you can go back and watch it. And with that, I wish you all a very, very good night. Lots to think about this weekend.
Ruchira, how much do you charge for a coach?
Trade secret.
She'll be sending you that on SMS.
That's no fun. Okay, bye.
Thank you for your time. Bye-bye. See you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. See you.